Everyone for coming, and I'd like to, before I introduce the panelists, extend a special thanks to all of the panelists that are here today that are going to participate in our dialogue about migration issues in the greater Salt Lake area. This is a special panel that we brought together that will be able to comment on the whole spectrum of migration issues here in Utah, including services provided to refugees, including local immigration policy. And I think you'll find that it's going to be a really different but interesting session, because basically the format is going to be that after I introduce everyone, I have a set of 4 questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists. And this is basically to familiarize us all with the kind of work they do and some of the specific challenges and issues of working on migration in Utah. And then we're going to open up the session to a question and answer period between the audience and the panelists. So it will be much less formal than previous panels, and hopefully there will be a lot more time for dialogue and conversation both between the panelists and between the audience. So I invite you to be thinking of questions you might like to ask once the more formal Q&A session is done. And I anticipate that part of the session will be 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have a lot of time to really have a good dialogue. So I encourage you to put your thinking caps on now. Okay, so let me just brief. I will make my introductions very brief so we can get right into the material. One of our panelists is Adan Batar, who is the Refugee Resettlement Director for Catholic Community Services, which is one of 2 main organizations that provide services for refugees here in the greater Salt Lake area. Bart Hill is also with us today. He is the development manager for the LDS Humanitarian Center, which is central to providing job training for refugees here in Salt Lake.
Could we ask them to let us know?
Yep. Oh, yep. Okay. So, Adan Batar, Bart Hill. Alice Steiner is the co-president of the League of Women's Voters, and she has been gathering information from Utah constituents in preparation of a national position paper on immigration. So thank you to Alice for being here today. Elissa McConkie is a program specialist. Elissa, did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Thank you. Is a program specialist for the International Rescue Committee, which is another of the central organizations that provide services for refugees here in Salt Lake. And finally, we have as a co-moderator and an honorary panelist, the Most Reverend John C. Wester. And he is the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City, which covers the entire state of Utah. And he also chairs the Committee on Migration and Refugees for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. So I'm going to pose the first question to both Bishop Wester and to all of the panelists, and this will be a question that basically will provide each of you to provide us with a kind of extended introduction, and then we'll have a few more policy-related questions, and then we're going to open up the forum to any kind of debate and discussion that you would all like to have, and we'll utilize the microphone for any of the participants once we start doing the Q&A. Okay? All right. So I guess I'll just start out with the first question. And this question is just so we can get to know each of you a little bit. What drew you personally to the current work that you're doing on migration? And given that I'm a teacher, we could go in alphabetical order just for this first one, and then the rest will be a little more free-flowing.
Well, sorry, I hope you could all hear me. I think it might be better. Is it better now? Okay, is it better now, I guess? Well, the reason I am involved with working with refugees and immigrants is I came here as a refugee myself a little over 10 years ago, sponsored through Catholic Community Services, and I received so much from the community here when I first arrived, and also the agency who resettled me. And then 2 years after I came to the United States, the Catholic Community Services started resettling Somali refugees. So they called me to help my fellow refugees from the same country So that's when I get involved working with refugees, and I started working with them as a case manager, working with them, helping the refugees, to resettle in Salt Lake area. And then I also started learning a lot of the immigration law and helping immigrants on getting their immigration status, and also helping them with the citizenship. So it's been almost 12 years now since I've been doing this work, and I'm delighted to continue. I think this is my call to serve.
My name is Agnes Chiao, and I'm a Community Impact Manager with the United Way of Salt Lake, and I oversee our Immigrant and Refugee Integration Initiative, where we're looking at how can we better serve our immigrant and refugee population here in Utah. I actually started my work background mostly working with low-income families, and I guess you could blame that on my Berkeley social justice roots, if you want to stereotype that way. But I eventually found that a lot of the low-income families I was working with through direct service organizations were immigrants and refugees, and then eventually ended up working on health disparities, looking at how there's a big gap in health services and needs with our immigrant and refugee populations, and then ended up at United Way. So that's my background.
As said, my name is Bart Hill. I'm the development manager at the LDS Humanitarian Center, which is part of the Deseret Industry System. My involvement on this situation is really different in some ways. In fact, it was just by assignment. I started my career really working with troubled youth and with private agency and contracting with the state of Utah, and after being there some almost 20 years, was ready for a change, and went and began working with the LDS Church, and as a rehabilitation manager with Deseret Industries, and worked there with individuals in the training programs assigned there. About 4.5 years ago, received an assignment change which sent me to the Humanitarian Center, and a result of just being at the Humanitarian Center, and about 70% of the individuals there were refugees, and so that's kind of where I got my involvement, just by moving on to there. And as a result of working there at the Humanitarian Center and seeing the disadvantages of so many of these people, but the opportunities that are there as far as training and helping them to move on into a self-reliant state as well, drew me to this situation.
I don't know if anybody else has had this situation, but you think your life is going in one direction, and all of a sudden something just falls in your lap and you say, oh, okay, and so you go in a completely different direction. That's sort of how I fell into refugee work. My background is in social work, and I kind of wanted to do what Bart was doing and work with kind of troubled teens, but I got into welfare to work programs and administrating welfare to work programs in Illinois, and I came out here for a wedding, was looking through the paper and found a job working with refugees, helping them to find employment, and I thought, oh my goodness, that sounds fascinating. And so 8.5 years later, I'm still with this with the IRC, and it's been amazing. I now serve as the resettlement operations manager and oversee the case management and the employment programs, and it has been tremendous. It's not at all what I had imagined that my life would deliver, but it has been amazing.
I'm going to talk briefly about myself and then about why the League of Women Voters is involved in this issue. I'm involved in it partly because as our children were growing up in Utah, which can be a somewhat closed and cloistered society, my husband and I decided that we would take it upon ourselves to essentially show our children the world. And so by the time my older son graduated from college, we had been to all 7 continents, and we had seen a great deal of what the world has to offer. My older son has been very interested in cultural anthropology issues and is currently taking a course of study down at the University of Arizona. And while down there, he is working on a lot of immigration issues related to the border. So when the League of Women Voters came up with the idea that they were going to put together a national position on immigration, I thought this is a great opportunity for me to kind of dive into the fray at the Utah level and try to educate the League within Utah to better understand what the immigration issues are. And so I dove in, and with the Honors College last fall, we put together a panel discussion and then also a whole series of films on immigration, which really helped to illustrate many of the issues out there. But I'm going to take just a couple more minutes and talk a little bit about why the League of Women Voters nationally is so interested in this issue. I'll start out by saying that the League really strongly believes that a good policy should be in place before we really get seriously involved in policing. And although the words sound the same, they're really very different. And a policy, putting a policy in place, really requires that you work through and really try to understand what all the issues are. You think about them. You try to come up with actions that will indeed come up with the results that you want. And then you work with the people to make certain that the policy that is in place is a policy that is supported by the people, at least a majority of the people generally. Okay, so the League really would like to see the U.S. Congress working on policy issues, and in order for the League to push that, they do have to put a position together. The second thing I'll say is that our current policy on immigration is terribly out of date. Just as an example, we had a big law in 1924 come through. We had another major revision to the law in 1965. We are as far away from 1965 now as 1965 was from 1924 when the 1965 law came through. It is really time for this country to take another look at it. And then lastly, I'll say the League is very concerned about the fact the way we are policing for immigration is having a tremendous impact on our own personal liberties. And also on all the things that as citizens of the United States, or just as people in the United States, we have come to believe about our country. We believe people should be treated equally, and that is no longer the case. We're creating two groups of people. Additionally, we're doing things like, I don't know if you all saw this article back in the Wall Street Journal in November, but we're selling green cards. For $500,000, you can buy a green card. I mean, this is pretty appalling in terms of the way we think about fairness in government should operate. We feel like government shouldn't unreasonably interfere with how we live our lives, and yet we're doing things like throwing people in jail, we're splitting families, we're creating citizen orphans whose parents get deported, and the children stay here, and we're punishing people for being good Samaritans. I mean, it's really quite appalling the sorts of things that the country has taken upon itself. And then lastly, we actually have a part of our laws say that we're not going to discriminate against people based upon race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And it seems to me that we are very actively discriminating against people based upon national origin.
I first got involved about 8 years ago when I was at the national meeting of our bishops' conference, and I happened to be sitting next to the bishop who was elected chair of the Committee on Migration. And our priest, San Francisco priest at the time, was on that and their staff, and so he turned to me and said, "John, will you be on the committee?" And I said, "Yes," and here I am. I was on the committee for the 3-year term and also on Clinics Board, which is our Catholic legal network that works on the legal end of working with migrants and helping them process their legal papers. And then I went, because of that, on the board, I went to China and to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Malaysia, to the Philippines, visiting refugees, most of the Hmong and the Burmese and other refugees, so that we could get to know them firsthand, a little bit about them, and get to know their concerns, their needs, so that we can come back here and help in the resettling of them, such as Adan does here in our diocese, and also so we can advocate for them, so we would learn what their issues are, so we could advocate with the policymakers in Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C. And then just this last year, I was elected to be the chair of the Committee on Migration, which is the bishops, the national bishops, as Julie said. Our national conference has this committee, so there are 8 of us bishops on it, and we have about 15 consultors. And we do mainly the work of migration, which includes resettlement. We have about 115 people working for the office in Washington, resettling, and then also advocacy, trying to promote policy and to effect, hopefully someday, comprehensive immigration reform.
So the next question I'd like to pose to the panel is, what is the biggest challenge of your work or analysis? And again, to kind of get a little more local flavor of the challenges in your work or your analysis on a day-to-day basis. And perhaps we could also hear a little bit more about the national work that Bishop Westler is doing, so we can contrast some of the local challenges with those that might be happening on the more national scale. And whoever feels compelled to respond to this question, you could start. You don't have to. Please don't feel like you have to follow alphabetical order each time. So, what's the biggest challenge of your work or analysis? Okay.
Can you turn it on?
Okay, well, I think there are a couple of challenges around the work that we're doing at United Way. One, around the integration process. I think that the anti-immigrant climate that we're facing right now is really a huge challenge and barrier to looking at how do we positively integrate the immigrants and refugees in our communities. The public discourse is really ugly and really negative, and not just towards undocumented immigrants. And this issue really does impact the larger immigrant and refugee population. So I would say the biggest barrier right now in terms of my work is how do you change public opinion around the anti-immigrant climate? And if anybody has an answer to that, I would love to talk to you.
To add to that, I think that's one of our biggest challenge also, that we see every day for our immigrants. For the refugees, what I see every day is, lack of affordable housing for our refugee population that are coming here, and don't have any means of support other than, what the public welfare is being provided, and also the support that they're getting from our agencies. That's our biggest challenge right now. And the other thing is, the state policies, that the TANF, temporary aid with assisted families, I think that's one of the other problems, for the participation of the refugees when they come here. There's no policies tailored, to help the refugees. These policies are designed, like everybody, but the refugees are coming here, leaving everything behind and starting a new life, and then yet we're imposing all these policies that, it's not designed to help or fit their need. That is one of the things. I think we're working with the legislatures in the state of Utah to help to educate them about the refugees, and also the Department of Workforce Services in the state level to educate them also, which the state has done a lot in changing some of the policies, but we still need more policies that would help the refugees. Those are some of the things that I can think of right now.
In the work that we're involved with Deseret Industries and the Humanitarian Center, individuals are referred to us, and as they come and are enrolled in our program, our focus is to help these individuals obtain employment skills and or training that will help them to move out into the community and hopefully earn enough money that they can support themselves and their families. That's our major focus, is to help these individuals in developing those work skills. But the thing that we find the most difficult is communication. Having, so many different people and so many different languages. Currently, I think we have about 20 different languages that are spoken at the Humanitarian Center. And as we work with these individuals and try and develop plans, it's the communicating to them and having them effectively communicate their desires and their wants. And we find that's, language is probably to us the biggest barrier. And then, we're able to identify a lot of barriers that are preventing them from being able to succeed in employment and other situations. And it's communicating that information to them and how they can understand what we can do, what the community can do, and how we can work together.
I think they just checked everything off of the list that I had written of challenges. So let me just give you some examples of kind of why or how these things become difficult when we're working with a refugee population. When we look at, for example, the discrimination and how that affects within housing, as Adan talked about, one of the things that we face as new arrivals come is we need to find them a place to live. Well, even if it's not affordable, we still have to have a place for them to live. And so we go and we work with a variety of apartment managers or to talk to them about giving homes to people who are coming to the United States who maybe have never lived in a home that looks like your home and my home, who've never lived in an apartment, who've never lived in an area with running water, and so, or they come here and they have, upon arrival, they don't have a social security card. That doesn't come for a couple of weeks. They don't have a rental history. You can't do a credit check on them because they have no credit. And so these are all things that that people have put into place that now disqualify refugees from finding housing, and it becomes very challenging. Another example as far as interpretation goes is communication is difficult, and we're not, we can do better at offering interpretation services to refugees. Let's take the school system, for example. You put a child in the school system, and the schools are not equipped with the funding for interpreters to work with the students as they need to and to work with the parents. And there's other areas as well where this inaccessibility of interpretation becomes very challenging.
I'd say one of the biggest challenges that we face is the fact that there's a fair amount of confusion, I think, in the United States about what kind of democracy we really have. There's kind of a belief that we have public clamor democracy, where the louder the voice, that's the way it ought to go. And what we actually have is a representative democracy, where we vote in people who are then supposed to take the time and the effort to understand the issues and make the best decisions for the benefit of the vast majority of us. I think that some of our legislators are confused, but I think as voters, what we can do is to educate our legislators. I mean, ultimately, if they are representing us, they're representing not necessarily our point of view, but they are representing all of us together, and what we need to do is give them the arguments and the ideas that they need in order to make the correct decisions that we hopefully will be the way we want it to go, but it may not be, so long as they have those ideas. And I'll say, as I listened to all of the presentations over the past couple of days, they were all extremely interesting, and I would also say they were fairly academic. They were not something that I would want to send off to a legislator and expect the legislator to sit down and read it. And yet the information in them was very, very important. And there has to be some way to translate that information and make certain that the legislators get the kernels of important stuff that they need in order to make the decisions that they need to make.
I think along those lines, for me, one of the biggest challenges that I see is getting the facts out there, to get the truth out there. And we just voted last November as a body of bishops to refund the JFI, the Justice for Immigrants program, which is meant to get the word out to our Catholic parishes. So that's a big, and I think that's very important, because then, in my view, and that's why I'm so interested in this, is a wonderful thing to do, to get the facts out. I sense, it's my anecdotally, that the majority of people in this country are in favor of comprehensive immigration reform, but that's not the voice that we hear, as Alice says. And so I think that if the facts get out there, if we can speak the truth clearly, then it will help in this national debate. And I think that'll help with our legislators. That's part of the challenge too, is that they're hearing these strident voices. And frankly, in my own limited experience with them, either here in Utah or in Washington, D.C., I believe that our legislators feel that they're hearing such a strong push that they feel that they must do something, and therefore, but I do think that many of the ones I've talked to understand the points of view that we're bringing to them, but they find it difficult to enact laws to back that up. I think part of the problem is if I could call it a challenge, it's good and bad both, but it's the media. A lot of what we have to say does not admit to quick sound bites, and so the challenge is how do we get what we have to say in a form that people can hear it and will listen to it.
Thank you very much. We're going to do a couple more quick introductory questions, and then we're going to open it right up. Unless, did you have a follow-up question that you would like to? Thank you very much. So can people come to you afterward and get more information about that? So this is Lily, the graduate student in the Department of Sociology. Thank you. All right. Great. Well, and hopefully that could be one of the topics for conversation in a couple of minutes, to think about ways to get some of the facts out in ways that are not encumbered by the academic jargon with which most of us write. So that would be a great thing to talk about a little more. Well, I can speak for myself in the academic jargon. I don't want to cast aspersions on the rest of my colleagues. All right, the next question I would like to pose is specifically about Utah. And having lived outside of the state for nearly 20 years before coming back, when most people think about Utah, they don't think about it as a place of any kind of diversity. They don't think about migrants. They don't think about refugees. But in fact, Utah is becoming a new destination for migrants, and it's a very important place of settlement for political refugees. So I'd love to hear from the panel, what makes Utah unique as a place for new migrants, for new immigrants, or for political refugees? And again, for anyone in the panel who feels called to respond to that question.
I'll start since the microphone's here, and I'll start by just telling you a little story. I was speaking with some new arrivals, and there was this family, and they had been assigned to come to Salt Lake City. Now, with refugees, most often they don't get to choose where in the United States they will end up. It's kind of wherever they end up. And so this particular family, of course, was assigned to Salt Lake. And in the refugee camp, the way that you find out where you're going is that it's typically posted on a board. And you find your name and you go across and you see what city you're going to. And so everybody's gathering around this board, and one guy asks another guy, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Oh, I'm going to Salt Lake City." And he says, "Oh, I hear there's a lot of cowboys there." And so he's like, okay. So then, he didn't know anything about Salt Lake City, and he gets on a plane, and he gets chatting with the woman next to him, and she says, "Oh, where are you from? Oh, you're going to the United States. Oh, you're going to be there permanently. Wonderful. Well, where are you going?" And he says, "Salt Lake City." And he said, she just looked at me and said, "Good luck." So, of course, a refugee who's already nervous about going to a new place now is extremely nervous. And I said, "Okay, well, so what happened?" And he says, "Well, I got off the plane, and I was so nervous, but there was my caseworker standing outside the plane with a big smile and shook my hand and put all of my concerns just at ease." And he says, ever since then, people have been so friendly to me. They have been so welcoming, and I tell everybody that they should come to Salt Lake City. And this is what we experience on a regular basis, is that the word is that Salt Lake City is a great place to be a new American. There are a couple of things that we look at when we choose where to set up an office or where to start resettling refugees. One of them is the cost of living. will it be a place that refugees can afford to live? And until recently, our housing was affordable and was fairly easy to lay hands on. And so because of our cost of living, this is a good place for refugees to be. Another reason is that there are job opportunities in Salt Lake for refugees. Most of the refugees who come to the United States can find employment within their first 6 months of being in the United States. Now, if you think about that, if you're going to throw me into, to Thailand or to Africa or someplace, for me to get a job within 6 months seems a little bit overwhelming, since I probably want to learn the language first and get to know my new surroundings. But in fact, even more refugees than get jobs within 6 months. There are also a great deal of refugees who get jobs very much sooner than that, within 4 months, for example. And so Utah and Salt Lake is a great place for refugees because there are employment opportunities. And lastly, just because of how welcoming our community is, we experience overwhelmingly the help of the community on so many levels, and through our volunteer programs, through donations that are received, and just the treatment by the community, by the majority of people that they encounter is positive. Don't fight.
I'm going to probably say what is very obvious, which is clearly the history of the peoples in Utah is one of emigration, and it's not just sort of a past history. It is a history that is reenacted every year as the July 24th parade and the whole experience. But so I think it has taken on almost a mythical status. Of people emigrating, people going into a new place, people making a new home, that kind of alters the point of view of many people within the state of Utah. That is very, very beneficial. So anyhow, I just think that it is part of the sort of the way Utah does things, is to accept immigrants into its environment.
I think the other important factor is, the delivery of services, for the refugees, and the coordination between the service providers, because we have a unique system, that most states don't have, that all the communities here working together and helping those who are most in need. And the refugees, we have refugee service providers, in our community that brainstorm and find solution for the problems, and that's one of the biggest things also, that we always show our national office and the feds say Utah is a place for refugees, and also it's a family oriented state, that and we are known nationally also in receiving some of the most difficult to serve cases that we receive all the time. Like, whenever there is a special population that the U.S. government wants to, resettle, they always look upon us, when we resettle the Sudanese Lost Boys, it was a place for Utah. When we resettle the Somali Bantu refugees, we were the first ones to say we would like to accept them here in Utah. So, we have really a great system when it comes to helping the refugees.
I'm going to talk about Utah in a slightly different context, more around policy, and I think it was Patricia Fernandez-Kelly that was yesterday that was asking about our driving privilege card and mentioned that we were a welcoming state. And I know we all have our Utah stories where we go to another state and they're like, "Where are you from?" I'm from Utah. And I was actually at a national immigrant integration conference in Chicago, and we were talking about the integration agenda And here in Chicago, Illinois, where they have an Office of New Americans, they had an executive order by their governor around the issue of immigrants and refugees, very, very progressive. And so I was a little embarrassed and daunted and to kind of talk about Salt Lake City, Utah. And when they found out that I was from Utah, they said, well, that's amazing. You know, Utah is a great state. You have in-state tuition, you have a driving privilege card, and in comparison to a number of other states, Utah, at least we were, considered a state that was very progressive around policies for immigrants and refugees, specifically undocumented immigrants. I'm not sure what they're going to say next year when I go to the conference after this legislative session, but I think that was something that made us really unique. The other thing that I think makes us unique as a state receiving immigrants and refugees, whether it's good or bad, is that, as has been mentioned in this conference, is that we are a pre-emerging gateway state. So we don't have a huge history in terms of traditional immigrants and refugees like other states or cities with the integration process. And so there are some challenges there, and we're trying to figure it out as we move along, but that is something that makes us unique.
I think a lot of the things that I was thinking of has really been said, but I think what really makes Utah unique, and maybe it's just emphasizing that again, is the people. It's the people of Utah. I think it's their giving nature, their caring nature, wanting to reach out and to help and to serve one another. Now, this can be a pro and a con, because I think as a result of it, sometimes we want to do too much and to give too much, where personal responsibility needs to rest with people, and we need to help them learn the things that they need in order to adjust to it instead of just giving them everything. And I think we have to work together. But I think another thing is, because as a people, I think we want to work with one another. We want to build bridges within different organizations and structures and sects, and I think that is a significant part of what makes Utah unique in serving this population.
Just to say, I was going to mention the hospitality of the people, which is what I was told before I came here last year, and I found that personally. I know for a fact that that's true. And secondly, the history of our state. But just to say, to kind of back up what's already been said so eloquently, when I went back to Washington and they found out that I was transferred to Salt Lake City, immediately the people in MRS, Migration and Refugee Services Department, said, "Oh, Salt Lake City, we know about you folks. You're doing great work out there with the refugees and asylum seekers." So we're very well known in this area, and I think that's significant. And just a few weeks ago, Johnny Young, who's the new director of MRS for us, came out and visited Batar and did some good Adan and did some good visiting, and he again was just so extremely impressed. So just it's kind of it's amazing, really. This state has a lot to offer in this regard.
All right, I have one more formal question, and then we'll open it up to a community discussion. And I think everyone touched on some of the really interesting and unique aspects that make Utah a great place to live. The flip side of that, however, is that currently, as we're nearing the end of the legislative debate, there have been, I think at last count, about 20 immigration-related pieces of policy being discussed, the majority of which are actually very anti-immigrant in their spirit. So while we do have a driver's privilege card that is accessible to undocumented migrants, every year that there's a proposal to repeal it. There's also proposals to repeal in-state tuition to undocumented residents who have graduated from Utah high schools. So I'm wondering now if we could talk about, just for a couple of minutes, some of the policy challenges, because really we're seeing that Utah is an extremely multifaceted place. On one hand, there are so many aspects of our community and the way we integrate that are incredibly welcoming and that make it a very unique place. But at the same time, we have these policy challenges that I'd like any of the panelists to comment on, to just sort of explain, is this a contradiction? Is this, how do we explain wanting to help each other, wanting to build bridges, at the same time saying, I don't care if you graduated from high school here, you're not going to get in-state tuition. So if you could kind of explore a few of those tensions, that would be great.
We are a state of a great deal of compassion and not much money. And I think that's where a lot of our conflicts come in that a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing is related to spending local funds on services that immigrants might use. And whether or not immigrants use them or not, there's always rhetoric about spending money on government services in this state. It's just the nature of the ground that we live in. But anyhow, I do think I think that's the major conflict. It's one of, I mean, on the one side, we have what I was very pleased to see the leadership of the LDS Church come out and say, measure twice before you cut is what I think the actual quote is. And I think that stopped a lot of things. It made people really think twice as they moved ahead. And on the other hand, you have people like the Utah Taxpayers Association, which are not anti-immigrant, but really anti-spending public funds on a whole variety of services, and may well get on anti-immigrant bills just because it cuts public funding. So I think there's a conflict that we have there.
It seems to me that another policy issue is that of the legal question, and I think that's an issue that many people have a hard time wrapping around. That the soundbite that's used is, what is it about illegal you don't understand? Mm-hmm. And the problem is that the question can't be easily answered. It's a complex question because, in fact, the laws are broken, mainly because of immigrants who overextend their visas. The majority of immigrants statistically are here because they overextend their visa. There's not hundreds of thousands of people coming across the border, every day. And I think that that's an issue that needs to be looked at from a policy point of view. What does it mean that these laws are broken? And I think we have too facile or too simplistic an understanding of illegal. Now, a bank robber that's illegal to rob a bank. It's illegal to murder people. It's illegal to speed on I-15. Is there anybody in this room who could say that we've never done that? So I think that we need to have a more sophisticated understanding of what is the intent and what is the effect of the breaking of the law. What is the intent of people who have, in fact, de facto broken the law, and what is the effect? The intent is to survive, to feed a family in most cases. The effect, frankly, assists our economy. I'm very interested in what economists say, but the data that I am familiar with indicate that the economy is benefited. New jobs are created and jobs are taken that otherwise people here would not take. So I think that's an issue that needs to be looked at because, frankly, I believe that if that question could be answered satisfactorily, many people would have no other objections, I don't think, to opening their arms and to have some kind of a comprehensive immigration reform.
I think I just want to make a comment on maybe some of the discrepancies or the conflict that exists. And as good as the people are and willing to give of resources that they have, material and money and things in order to help one another, I think one of the things that's difficult for many people is just to get involved personally in the lives of these individuals. I think we have individuals who are trying to make laws and policies who really have very limited involvement personally in the lives of these people. And I think looking at the article that was in the Deseret News, I think it was this past Sunday with an interview with Bishop Wester, they need to take time to know who these people are. And once you spend some time with these individuals and you find out a little bit about their history, now this doesn't matter, I don't think it matters whether they're a refugee, whether they're a non-document individual or a migrant that have come here. We need to take the time to know who they are, to learn of their story, to learn of their dreams and their hopes and their aspirations, as well as the struggles that they've encountered in their own lives. Once you take that humanistic approach and you really find out who they are, you have a totally different attitude in your approach and what you're trying to decide.
On the policy issue, I would say in a year where we've had the largest surplus that we've ever had in our state, that a lot of scapegoating is going on and a lot of criminalization of immigrants, and it's not really about the money. And Unfortunately, a lot of our immigrants aren't utilizing public services because they're barred from being able to do so. It's one of the another myth or fact that often doesn't get out there. So I think what we saw happen this session was something that we see historically happen, which is in times when there's economic uncertainty or downturn, people start scapegoating and start looking for a reason for that economic downturn. And unfortunately, it really landed on the shoulders of undocumented immigrants this session. And I hope that we can change some of those policies and implement policies that will stop proliferating a sense of fear in our communities and will instead promote cohesiveness and integration of our different communities.
Okay.
And I would say, as far as refugees specifically are concerned, I think seeing some policy better developed around some of the challenges that we've kind of spoken on access to interpretation, fair housing, and non-discrimination would also be very beneficial.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I'd like to now open it up to Q&A in the audience. Perhaps what I'll do is just bring the microphone to people, if that works. Down, I'll nod to you to let you know that you're on the queue. So we'll start here and then you have that hand here, hand over here.
Are we ready now? I have I have several comments. One, we come to meetings like this and we talk to each other, we talk to the choir about how we really communicate out there. And I don't know that this panel really represents what is going on in Utah right now. For one thing, we say we're community of values and caring and loving, but it's not manifested at the legislature. And I think the answering Bishop Wester's question is, how do we communicate this? And I think our problem is we speak in paragraphs, and you have to start talking in sound bites. And the other thing is not what you say, but it's who says it. It's one thing for us to say it, but it's another thing for somebody else. Can we not talk to the contributors, to people to put people in office? I think we assume our hearts are so good that we think if we do the right thing, everybody see the lights. That's not the way it happens. And we have a different problem with the refugees versus illegal immigrants. Refugees is one of resources. The other one is the illegal one, and we're living in a nation of fear where the whole nation is very fearful, and we're looking for answers. And yeah, all of a sudden we did look for the scapegoats, and it's illegal immigrants. So I think we have a big job of informing, of educating, but it's a matter of putting something before them in very concrete terms. I think this committee, the coalition that was put together by the business people, they're going to want some answers. They're going to talk about the challenges. Are we going to put together a white paper for them and say, here's the impact, here's the pros and cons, because everybody talks in generalities, but no one talks about specifics.
These all work, so perhaps the panelists now could use these microphones and scoot these up so they're a little closer to you. So I'd like any of the panelists who would like to respond to those comments.
If you get on the legislative website, there are email links to every single legislator up in the Utah legislation. And I would think it'd be interesting for you all to sort of think about contacting. It's better if you contact your own legislator, but if you happen to know one of the other ones, you're certainly welcome to contact them as well. And as bills come through, simply say, I suggest you support this bill or reject this bill for the following reasons. It's not just support or reject. You also have to provide some reasons, because ultimately those reasons all add up to an argument as to what the best decision would be. So it's really important to contact your legislators. It is not just talking among ourselves. You actually have to get out there and contact them. One of the nice things about Utah is you can contact your legislators, and they probably know you. And if they don't, they will soon. But the same is actually true for our guys in Washington. It's really, I mean, we are a small enough state that we have a tremendous voice as the people in this state.
I think also just educating each other. I mean, we're here because this is important to us, but there are a lot of people who are not here who maybe haven't been educated about the issues. They don't understand why these are important, or you know, really what's going on. And so taking opportunities just to speak in the community. I mean, the people around me know a lot more about the things that I feel passionate about, having known me now, and now understand why I say the things I do and why I fight for the things that I do. And you know, not all of them have joined my little bandwagon, but many of them have, because they understand. And so, you know, just taking the time to educate the people around you is also very important.
I really appreciate Mr. Flores' comments, because this is a message that we're trying to get out, and our message is a hard one to encapsulate in sound bites. I think it is important who carries that message, and unfortunately the situation is right now that people are they're unwilling to stand up and carry that message because it's a controversial and hot issue. They're afraid Minutemen are going to appear outside their offices, or ICE is going to appear in front of their business. So it's something very problematic, and we have to find a way to give our business leaders and others who are of influence cover to begin to be able to carry that message. So a little bit about the Immigration Policy Coalition that's being put together. It is a coalition made up of a broad base of stakeholders and groups, and so although the business community is kind of leading that, we do encourage other stakeholders to come to the table for that. On Alice's point, what we heard from legislators over and over and over again this year was that 90% of their constituents wanted something done on this issue, that they sent out surveys, and 90% of their constituents said, get rid of them. So yes, it's partially how we message this. It's also partially who carries it. But we also do need every single person to be contacting their legislators, and especially in critical areas like in St. George. I hate to say it, but if you live in Salt Lake County like I do, most of our legislators are on board. But if you have friends in St. George, get them to carry that message, because it's not getting down there, and we need people to contact their legislators who are constituents in those rural areas.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, and we've been talking about, and I appreciate your comments in regards to this issue, but there seems to be a huge amount of difference in services that's provided to the refugee community and to the undocumented. I mean, I know that, for example, you know, in terms of just you know, the refugee, a refugee has Social Security, a temporary work permit, and you know, on Medicaid and all kinds of assistance that they receive when they get here. But what specifically does your agencies provide in terms of to the undocumented immigrant?
Catholic Community Services have a immigration program, and I think our agency has one of the largest immigration program in the state. And that's one of the biggest service that we provide to the immigrants, you know, whether they are documented or undocumented. We help anybody who come to our doors, you know, who needing immigration help. And we use a sliding scale fees, or, you know, or sometimes we waive our fees if the families cannot afford our fees. And also we have a lot of other programs, that, we don't ask people for their, whether they're documented or undocumented. We simply look their needs and we help them with whatever needs they're coming with. It is sad, that, there isn't that many benefits that the undocumented immigrants they could get from the state. When you look at the Medicaid, food stamps, or financial assistance, which the refugees, are eligible for by federal law, and we have a lot of services that we could help with the immigrants in our agency.
The International Rescue Committee is different from the Catholic Community Services in that all we do is refugees. That's the work that we do. The greatest part of the work that we do is actually overseas in the war-torn countries, helping to set up the refugee camps and to kind of rebuild after things have settled down. But what we do is refugees.
There's been a lot of discussion about the immigration services and then services for immigrants, whether they're legally here or whether they're undocumented, and then also the refugee. And there's been a lot of great work being done, not only by the refugee service providers, but also by our public agencies, like the creation of, what are they calling it, the Office of Refugees Services. That was created by a refugee working group. The way we think about integration, which is partially making sure that immigrants and refugees have access to services, we don't really look at it in terms of, at least as United Way, we don't see it as a immigrants versus refugees sort of thing. It's more of a continuum of services that we could provide for immigrants and refugees, and undocumented immigrants or legal immigrants or refugees may arrive and be in different places on that continuum. So I think we need to be holistic about how we provide our services and look at how can we implement in a way that meets that family's needs, as opposed to looking at them as what's your documentation status or what do you have access to. And I think we'll find that integration will be a lot easier of a process for those families if we approach it in that holistic way.
I think I agree with that, and because when you look at the needs for the refugees and immigrants, there's a lot of similarities, so I think we need to focus when we're sending this message. They both need the same, help.
Unfortunately, I was just told we need to end. I wasn't being as vigilant a timekeeper as. But hold tight, because we're gonna. I'm gonna pass. There was one more person on the queue before you, Patricia. So it wasn't. I'm so sorry, but we do have to convene now. Well, we are going to come back together in just a minute, and I'm going to turn the mic over to George to announce what's coming up next. But we're going to be able to continue the conversation. So maybe I can put a special plea in for, we had on our queue a young lady here, Patricia, and then someone in the back that hopefully we can all come back together and talk about these issues. But I would like to thank the panel so much, everyone, for coming. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you.
And thank you, Julie. Let's not label this a break, okay? But if you want to get up and stretch for just a couple of minutes, in a way, our closing session is a continuation of this fantastic discussion, because we're bringing back together our guest scholars and experts from other parts of the country and Canada to continue this dialogue about policy implications. So we'll start in just a couple of minutes, and I hope that our guests from the community can stay for that, and we'll be able to get back to some of these questions. So thank you.